Jayaprakash revitalized new ways of thinking. He shunned power, he questioned received orthodoxies, combined the best of Marx and Gandhi, offered a counter-narrative to fascism, and encouraged a whole generation to dream of revolution. In the words of political theorist Hannah Arendt, written in the preface of her 1968 collection, it's a very seminal collection of essays called Men in Dark Times. Even in the darkest of times, we have the right as individuals to expect elimination. 43 years after his death, उनकी मृत्यु 1979 में हुई थी, अक्टूबर के महीने में, as the unbending champion of the oppressed, his legacy resonates in social movements around the world and in the resurgence of socialist writings, in the works of scholars like Paul Krugman, Thomas Piketty and Joseph Stiglitz. उनके जो ideas हैं, उनका प्रभाव हमें इन writings में मिलता है. My late father, historian Vimal Prasad, who envisioned our recent biography of Jayaprakash Narayan titled The Dream of Revolution, जिसका जिक्र तिवारी जी ने अभी किया, did a major amount of groundwork for it. जब वो 80 के दशक से गुजर रहे थे, अपने 80 साल के बाद, उन्होंने he put together and edited 10 volumes of Jayaprakash Narayan's selected works, and he introduced selections of JP's writings in books like Socialism, Sarvodaya and Democracy, Revolutionary's Quest. Then he did a very elegant book called Gandhi, Nehru and Jayaprakash, Studies in Leadership, and his last book, JP's Quest and Legacy. तो वो एक तरह से JP के legacy से ही engage करते रहे अपने जीवन के कई वर्षों तक. Like Jayaprakash, he studied in the US for several years. He was a Fulbright scholar, George William Curtis, and later Rockefeller Foundation Fellow, getting his doctorate degree from the Columbia University in 1958. He passed on soon after conceptualizing this book. ये पुस्तक एक तरह से उनका एक प्रॉमिस था जयप्रकाश नारायण को 1978 में. वो उनसे मिलने गए थे और एक लंबा साक्षात्कार हुआ था उनका जेपी के साथ. जेपी अक्सर वो हमारे एक तरह से परिवार के सदस्य थे. वो so he was engaging with his legacy right through अपने student days से ही. लेकिन उन्होंने एक प्रॉमिस किया था जयप्रकाश नारायण को. उन्होंने कहा था कि मैं आपकी मोस्ट डेफिनेटिव बायोग्राफी मैं लिखूंगा, लेकिन वो कर नहीं पाए. और when my father was 92, he began to conceptualize this biography, but unfortunately died the same year. I decided to carry the project forward, and the result is this lovely book. I want to show it to all of you. I wonder if your library has a copy of it. This is published by Penguin Random House a few months ago. To envision Jayaprakash Narayan's role and relevance, I want to recapitulate some major inflection points in his life. He was born in 1902, many of you would know that, and bitten by the bug of revolution. And these are not my words or my father's words, these are his own words written in his prison notebook. He was bitten by the bug of revolution when he was still in high school. During the non-cooperation movement, he quit college and cut his teeth in student politics like many other young people of that generation. But the desire for higher education continued to haunt him. He was certain he would not go back to an institution supported by the colonial government. American universities एक तरह से उनके ज़हन में, उनके zone of consideration में आए when he heard that it was possible to work one's way through college in America. He set sail for America. और इसके पहले मैं कहना चाहूँगी कि this was also a time just before he went to America when he married the young and very feisty, बहुत जबरदस्त पर्सनालिटी वाली प्रभावती जी से उनका विवाह हुआ. वो ब्रजकिशोर प्रसाद की डॉटर थी. ब्रजकिशोर प्रसाद एक लेजेंडरी सोशल रिफॉर्मर, लॉयर और फ्रीडम फाइटर थे, गांधीयन थे, और प्रभावती जी खुद भी एक डाई हार्ड गांधीयन थी. He set sail for America, more specifically for the University of California in Berkeley in May 1922 when he was not even 20. carrying $600, उस समय तो it must have seemed like a fortune, handed over by his father. He would remain in the US for 7 years after that, studying by turn in universities of California, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Ohio, from where he obtained his master's degree in sociology in 1929. During this period, like most other students, he worked in an orchard, waited tables at restaurants, washed dishes, slogged in terracotta factory, in departmental stores, in a slaughterhouse. And he writes that for a while he was even the vendor of a whitening cream in the narrow lanes inhabited by African Americans in Chicago, something that he really hated. He was admitted into second year, getting a year's credit for his intermediate science degree in India. He studied chemical engineering initially, but later felt that the study of society was his calling. He combined his study of sociology with courses in bacteriology and calculus. His engagement with politics deepened during this time. He was in touch with the activists of the Ghadar Party, headquartered in San Francisco, meeting them often for conversations about the political climate of India and also, importantly, of America, where the election of 1920 had seen the weakening of the Democratic Party and a return to a pro-business and a very pro-capitalist government, what I would like to call a quintessentially Republican era. Paradoxically, this was also labeled as the Roaring Twenties, a decade defined by post-war angst, social unrest, and protest. And it was in this heart of resilient capitalism that Jayaprakash paradoxically embraced Marxism. How did that happen? By the summer of 1924, the reasons for reasons of economic expediency, he transited from Berkeley to Iowa, that had much lower tuition fee, and eventually, looking for a more stimulating environment, he went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison. The university campus at Madison was infused with radicalism. It had in its faculty scholars known for their iconoclastic progressive outlook and a strong stand on academic freedom. There was, for instance, a serious outrage when Edward Ross, a sociology professor, was censored because he defended the right of Emma Goldman, a leading feminist of that time and an avant-garde anarchist, to lecture at the university. I think, the reason why I'm talking a little bit more about his university life is because I'm talking to, hopefully, a lot of students in IGNOU who may somewhere find a connect. One of Jayaprakash's closest friends in Madison was a Polish Jew called Abraham Landy, who was a member of the students' wing of the Communist Party. He loaned Jayaprakash Marx's literature. I think it was a very random loaning to begin with, but the latter read the literature with great relish. These books radicalized Jayaprakash. He went through almost all the writings of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, Plekhanov, available in English. And with the help of Landy, who translated some of Marx's writings in German, and the vast corpus of work of other Marxist revolutionaries like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Kautsky, Jayaprakash became hence familiar with even those writings not available in English at that time. He also read the writings of M.N. Roy, an important member of the Communist International, and frequently quoted from Roy's The Aftermath of Non-Cooperation in India in Transition. He was soon himself a prominent Marxist voice on the campus and a member of the communist cell, dreaming of a socialist revolution in India. He was a great dreamer. So at this point, he started dreaming of a socialist revolution comparable to the events of October 1917 in Russia. Looking back at that heady period, he would later recall, and I quote, "The Marxian science of revolution seems to offer a quicker road to socialism than Gandhi's technique of civil disobedience and non-cooperation." He added, "The thrilling success of the great Lenin, accounts of which we consumed with unsaturated hunger, seemed to establish beyond doubt the supremacy of the Marxian way of revolution." The 7 years spent in the US was seminal in Jayaprakash's life, and sort of उनको shape करने में बहुत अहम भूमिका इन 7 वर्षों की रही. वो वापस आए इंडिया नवंबर 1929 में at a crucial moment of India's history. गांधी उस समय भी एक dominant force थे in Indian politics, लेकिन एक तरह का firebrand assertiveness और एक radical agenda was firing young leaders like Nehru. Nehru had just returned from Europe, where he attended the International Congress Against Colonialism and Imperialism, and was appointed president of the, and very few people actually know this, Marxist-Leninist League Against Imperialism. Back home, Nehru rejected the demand, the rather moderate demand for dominion status, and much to Jayaprakash's delight, moved for the complete independence resolution at the 1929 Lahore Congress session, to the cries of long live revolution and the unfurling of one of the first national flags. Swerving from theoretical Marxism to a vision of socialism that seemed at least initially to complement Nehru's, Jayaprakash joined the Congress with the aim of radicalizing it and turning it into an anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist struggle. At Nehru's behest, he took charge of the newly established Department of Labor Research. What initially seemed like a completely nondescript job created the right space for incubating radical ideas, radical and fairly revolutionary political thought. He managed to wean back trade unions who were, at that point drifting away from Congress, and to keep the civil disobedience alive. बहुत सारे जो major leaders थे उस समय जेल में थे. उन्होंने फिर क्या किया कि वो एक underground movement create किए, and he also put together a very robust socialist research group. His solidarity with labor and peasant organization and grassroots movements laid the foundation of a strong socialist nucleus within the government. Jayaprakash himself, hi Salil, I just saw Salil Mishra. Jayaprakash himself managed to evade arrest till 1932. The long spell of incarceration in Nasik Central Jail that followed marked another significant turning point in his life. A group of progressive, educated young congressmen and women who were coming of age politically were also lodged in the same jail. I'm just going to name a few of them. There were a whole lot of them. People like Achyut Patwardhan, Meenu Masani, N.G. Gore, Ashok Mehta, and others also like Yusuf Mehrali, Ram Manohar Lohia, Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay, Ganga Sharan Sinha, Sri Prakash, K.B. Menon, Narendra Dev, Sampurnanand, बहुत सारे young people जो socialist in orientation थे, and they all shared the same vision and ideas. Even if they had differences, they were resolved through discussions. For them, socialism was not just an abstract philosophy, but a potent form of political engagement that would, they believed, lead to transformational outcomes. Their coming together led to the formation of the Congress Socialist Party in 1934. The formation of the party was strongly supported by Nehru. A letter written by him to Meenu Masani seems to be much more than a subtle endorsement of left-wing politics within the Congress. He said, and I quote, "I would welcome the formation of socialist groups in the Congress to influence the ideology of the Congress and the country. All over the world today, people are being forced to think in terms of economic and social change, and we in India cannot afford to remain in the backwater of pure politics. The time has undoubtedly come now when we must think more clearly and develop a scientific ideology." Jayaprakash at this point was only 32. He emerged as a Marxist theoretician at the age of 34 with his book, Why Socialism? The book took an extremely, बहुत ज़्यादा radical stand critiquing the Gandhian alternative as a dangerous doctrine based on what he said was timid economic analysis, good intentions, halaki, and ineffective moralizing that was deceiving the masses and encouraging the upper classes to continue their domination. He even crossed swords with his Gandhian wife. It was she herself was a strong woman on the role of khadi and charkha in removing the grinding poverty of the masses. Jayaprakash's extreme views at that point can be contested, but it cannot be denied that he succeeded in building socialism as a powerful countervailing force within the Congress. He also played an important role in liberating the idea of socialism from its doctrinal moorings by bringing it closer to the Indian context. As expected, over a period of time, his differences with the Congress old guard only grew more and more pronounced. He was constantly attacking the Congress party for being in the hands of a coterie that was anti-peasant and anti-labor and completely bourgeois in orientation, a coterie that was taking it on the path of negotiated settlements and politics of compromise. By 1942, Jayaprakash would turn to a spikier version of Marxism. With most of the leaders in jail, he escaped from jail. And the story of his escape is another story, जो बहुत ही एक तरह से it has been embellished over the years. Lekin the fact is that he scaled a 17-foot wall and escaped from the Hazaribagh jail and built an underground network of armed revolutionaries called the Azad Dasta. Interestingly, his blueprint on guerrilla strategy and tactics, it reads like Shea's treatise on guerrilla warfare that has been the Bible of revolutionary movements in not only Latin America but Central America too, even though his actions predated Shea's by at least a decade. His brief flirtation with guerrilla insurgency ended in his arrest, but he continued to exhort his followers to prepare for the last offensive, the struggle for liberty, the struggle for national unity and bread, to be organized by strengthening peasant and labor unions, student and youth organizations, weavers, cooperatives, and other grassroots organizations. Post-independence, unhappy with the distortions within the socialist movement and his serious differences with Nehru on several issues. एक issue का मैं जिक्र करती हूँ, erosion of civil liberties. In Bihar alone, you'll be surprised, in 1948, 500 socialist workers were arrested. In 1949, strikes were outlawed. And, JP constantly said that these are the ugly examples of growing fascism within the party. There were other issues also on which he and Nehru crossed swords, and most of all, the development model. He felt that Nehru was only paying lip service to socialism while promoting industrial capitalism. Jayaprakash altogether relinquished party politics by 1954 and began to see the kernels of social revolution and partyless democracy in the swirling Gandhian movement, Bhudan and Gramdan. Before I said to deconstruct the movement, I need to talk about his growing enchantment with orthodox Marxism. The reasons for this were many. His quest for Marxist unity by aligning with the Communist Party of India failed and created a deep aversion for the communists. He considered them to be Russia's fifth columnist and, as such, a perpetual danger to the country. The stories of Stalin's purges, of the Moscow trials against Trotskyites and several top officials of the Red Army reinforced his doubts about the soundness of the Soviet experience. He was equally outraged by the Soviet suppression of the Hungarian uprising in 1956. After years and years of charting out a political line that was diametrically opposed to Gandhi, it was evident by the late 1940s that he was adapting to the ideological shock of turning away from communism by drawing close to Gandhian thought. He began to feel that materialist philosophy was not capable of accommodating the non-material urges to practice goodness, which were essentially at the heart of human progress. In an essay titled Incentives to Goodness, written in 1952, he wrote rather poignantly, "For many years I have worshipped at the shrine of the goddess of dialectical materialism, which seemed to me intellectually more satisfying than any other philosophy. But it has become apparent to me that materialism robs man of the means to be truly human. In the kingdom of dialectical materialism, fear makes man conform, and the party takes the place of God. But when God himself or herself turns vicious, to be vicious becomes a universal code." For someone schooled in Hegelian and Marxist dialectics, this was a major intellectual and ideological shift towards a humanist approach to socialism, of looking at human agency and the role of ethics and values. It involved a deliberate distancing from the version of Marxism inherited from Sovietism and Maoism. His picture of socialism, and I once again quote him, was that of economic and political democracy. In this democracy, man would be neither slave to capitalism, nor to a party, nor to a state. I get back again to Bhutan. Bhutan, was, as you all know, an agrarian reform movement centered on the voluntary donation of land to the landless that had grown in strength in the 1950s. It dominated, and it would continue to dominate his consciousness all through the 50s and the 60s, 2 decades. He saw Bhudan and Gramdan, and of course, what he did was Jivan Dan, Sampati Dan. He saw this as a great experiment in democracy, perhaps the greatest, and the first step towards total revolution: social, political, economic, cultural, moral, and intellectual. It was a validation of the Gandhian path that showed that social revolution could take place peacefully and voluntarily. Jayaprakash also continued to remain India's poster boy of dissent, working tirelessly against the drowning of dissenting voices not only in India but abroad. He waged a relentless campaign for civil liberties and human rights, eventually founding the PUCL in 1976. Equally passionate was his continuing fight for social justice and against forces of communalism. By the 60s and 70s, JP began speaking about Gandhi's unfinished revolution and looking at university campuses as sites of powerful dissent. By 1973-74, he was also crossing swords with Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's government on major issues related to governance. Some of them not really the fault of that particular government, but because of global forces. And how much of it sounds familiar? The oil shock of 1973, 2 successive years of drought in 72 and 73, and most of all, 10 million Bangladesh refugees being given shelter and food. So all this caused crisis, so much so that, in 1 year, if one looks at Bombay, for instance, there were 20,000 strikes in just one place alone. And then, of course, none of us can forget the Great Railway Strike in 1974. But at this time, there was a major shift in the way the quiet revolutionary was looking at these processes. And, he was slowly turning into the foot soldier of revolution. Wearing his revolutionary heart on his sleeve, he told students in Ponar that the time for revolution was here and now. This was in 1973. In 1974, he began to find echoes of 1942 in the political theatres of first Gujarat and later Bihar. Students in universities and colleges began to support his call for action. What started as a revolt of students soon took the shape of a mass movement, defined by acts of civil disobedience, no tax campaigns, and the setting up of small parallel governments. On 6 March 1975, some of us were there, 300,000 men, women, and young boys and girls marched to Parliament in one of the biggest anti-government outpouring. In another epochal rally 3 months later, Jayaprakash called for a prolonged and widespread civil disobedience struggle. He appealed to the police and the armed forces to refuse to carry out illegal orders, openly daring the government to try him for treason. In the world's largest democracy was an unprecedented backfoot when in 1975, in the early hours of a hot summer day in the month of June, the Indian president declared a state of emergency, citing a dire threat to national security. This was followed by a period of unremitting repression, और ये इतना अच्छे से हम सभी जानते हैं that really it defies the need for recapitulation. फिर भी मैं थोड़ा बहुत तो इसके विषय में बोल ही देती हूँ. In a pre-dawn swoop, several leaders were arrested and Jayaprakash was one of them. Civil liberties were suspended and the constitution was amended and altered with impunity. Shashi Tharoor has called it the Seas in one of his books, and it shows to us how the personal crisis of a leader could metamorphose into the political crisis of the state. More than 100,000 men and women were arrested. There were large-scale demolitions of slums and forced sterilization of over 6 million citizens. Many journals closed or suspended their operations. The BBC reduced correspondent Mark Tully. Foreign correspondents of the Times, the Daily Telegraph, the Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times were expelled. Reporters of The Economist and The Guardian were also forced to leave. Indian newspapers like the Indian Express faced abominable intimidation in the form of raids, court cases, withdrawal of bank loans, and advertisements. Indra's claim that not even a dog barked during the emergency may have been a little bit of an exaggeration, a hyperbole, but it is true that, now, at least in the first phase, the economy was back on track with a good monsoon that ensured a record output of food, grain, and edible oil. And as observed by the Columbian law professor Tim Wu in a recent book on monopolies, big business remained closely aligned with the autocrat. When Indira called for elections in March 1977, 75-year-old Jayaprakash, already out of prison due to extreme ill health, worked to build a united democratic opposition. He was irrepressible as he campaigned using the catchy tagline of "Defeat the Dictator." With a radical manifesto that demanded both bread and liberty, Jayaprakash was once again the quintessential revolutionary. The Janata Party that he built could not, however, live up to its promise of a second revolution, comparable to the freedom from colonial rule in 1947. But his long pursuit of freedom and just and equitable order continues to resonate even today. He is remembered as the greatest keeper after Gandhi of India's political conscience. Thank you.